I mean, I looked up, and it was up above the trees flying over, and it looked like a dinosaur. It looked like a pterodactyl or a pterosaur or something. It had the big leathery wings and the beak face, and it was just gigantic. And it looked like this thing looked like it could have picked me up and hauled me away. It was that big.
Well, that is almost spot on what this husband and wife described to me in Gary, Indiana. Like that is eerie, honestly. And I just for the record, I don't know that my theory concerning the pterosaurs would be something similar to what I would consider with like the Mothman sightings. I personally think that the pterosaur sightings would be more likely to be something like a time slip, being able to see something that might have existed in the distant past rather than something that can sort of like consciously manipulate, reality.
When I saw it, I ran, I hid behind a tree, and when I looked up, it was already gone. And I never saw anything like that again. I mean, that was just, you guys were talking about it, and I was like, wow, maybe it's like that thing I saw when I was a kid.
Well, Karen, like the movies, when you see those creatures flying, right, looking for prey, was it making any noise, or was it quiet?
No, not at all. Not a sound.
Interesting.
You couldn't even hear the wings. You couldn't, and it wasn't making any verbal noise. It was just going over, and then it was gone.
How far off the ground, roughly? Can you remember? Or, I know that's a long time ago.
Way above the trees. It was like just traveling along at a slow pace.
Gliding along.
Yeah.
Ooh.
But it scared me enough. I hid behind the tree, and I looked up, and it was gone.
Well, you maybe were smart, getting behind the tree. Tobias, could they actually, if they're going through a time, whatever, warp, slip or whatever, could they actually attack a human and I hate to say it, have them for a snack?
Sure. Well, that's an important question, isn't it? I think we understand so little about this phenomenon that who's to say? I would say this though. I would definitely advise caution because, frankly, we just don't know. There's so much that's unknown about it. So the level of interaction that people would be capable of having with something like this, it's anybody's guess, but why risk it? Frankly. Maybe you're basically seeing the equivalent of a pterosaur's ghost, but
I had that instant caveman fear factor thing going on. Where if something looks like it can eat me, I'm not going to stand there gawking at it. I'm going to hide.
Right. Well, that's a good call. Yes. I would. I endorse that position. I think that's the best way to go about it. Because, who knows? I mean, if it's a situation where through some unknown, natural phenomenon, you're just both sort of sharing this liminal, temporal space, maybe it could eat you. I have no idea. But, it's definitely not worth getting eaten over. So, hiding behind a tree that's the right move, I think.
Well, or under a rock if you could fit. But you know what? I look if you can see it, then I got a funny feeling it might be able to see you, even if it's through a time warp or whatever. That's my thing. That's first thing on my mind would be like, if I can see it, it might see me. Hey, I look like a Big Mac, and I'm not going to hang around.
I got Trisket written across my forehead. It's like, no. No.
Well, Karen, I want to thank you for, being on the chat like you do and sharing that because, I'm glad it matches what he had reported because that just kind of verifies, I think,
Yeah,
things like this do exist.
Me too, because I mean, I've seen lots of things when I was a kid, and like we had this huge pond in our backyard, and I would look out the upstairs window towards the pond, and I'd see this gigantic sea turtle coming up to sun himself, and nobody believed me for like 2 years, and I would see this thing every summer coming up to sun itself, and finally the neighbor lady called my dad over because she said there was this giant turtle in her front yard digging a hole. And he went over there and he come running back and got a broom, and he went running back over there and it snapped the broom in half. And I was like, I told you. I said, this thing was the size of the hood of his station wagon.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And nobody believed me. And there it was. And then she remembered that when they were in the Bahamas or something, they had brought back a baby one and put it in the pond.
Ah.
So I was like, yeah, it came back to bite you, didn't it?
There you go. Well, that's interesting to me, because it sort of illustrates why so many of the people that I speak to don't come forward, with their stories. There are so many people where the first time that happens, where their own family is just like, you're full of it. That's the last time they want to talk about it. So, it's just amazing to me how people have this shared experience almost of having an amazing sighting, like witnessing something that's supposed to be completely impossible out of human experience, and they try to tell people that they care about and get brushed off. And then, well, kudos to you, Karen, for coming forward and still talking about stuff. Because, a lot of people just give up and just don't.
I was happy. I'm sorry. I was just happy to hear that somebody else saw something similar, because I thought I was nuts.
That's what happens
really
too. Then is it takes another report for people to be like, oh wow, that's what I saw, that's what I experienced, and then they finally come forward because they know they're in a safe place to talk about it.
Well, Karen, I want to thank you for calling in and sharing that.
Well, thanks for getting me in early, Gary.
Okay. Well, you take care and keep listening.
I will. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Bye.
Yeah. See, that kind of like, when other people see things like that, it makes you just wonder, what's all out there. Now, the big turtle, I could see that. If somebody went to the Bahamas and brought a turtle back, I guess, I guess it could grow. I knew somebody years and years ago, which is totally illegal to bring in this country. He had 2 piranhas. And all of a sudden, and then he actually had more than 2. And then I know that he almost lost part of his finger, and then he did a dumb thing. He dumped it in the lake. Which, the authorities, when they found out, they said, well, it'll probably die because of the temperature. But, that's scary, people doing weird things like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up watching piranha, I'm not willing to risk cold weather killing it. Just keep them out of the lakes, all right?
Could you imagine Could you imagine going in, a nice hot day in the summer and go in the lake, and all of a sudden you put your foot in the lake, and start walking in, and you don't have no skin left or flesh?
Right. Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, I will pass on that. Yeah, I mean, that is really, really interesting too. What Karen described, as far as, she had this sighting, she saw this giant turtle, and nobody believed her. But then, sure enough, it's in the front yard one day. I wish that, people's first instinct, and I'm not telling people to be completely credulous and just believe everything they hear, but I just wish that people could at least approach, stuff they hear from their loved ones with something of an open mind. Like, if you have a good friend or a family member or something who reports something anomalous to you, You don't have to just believe that everything happened exactly like they said it did, because sometimes people can be mistaken, sure. But, it wouldn't kill people just to listen to them, frankly. I mean, right, honestly.
Well, there's so many things out there that is unaccountable, I mean, I just only can go to the weird sighting I had in 2002. If somebody, before I went on my trip would have told me, what I seen, I kept it quiet for quite a few years,
Sure.
we started talking about it on the show. I mean, the reason why I kept it quiet is because I knew darn well two things: people weren't going to believe me, or two, they're going to think I'm crazy or smoking something.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a really common experience. Going back to these Mothman sightings around Lake Michigan, like that has been my experience with these witnesses time and time again. If we hadn't had that initial few reports in the spring of 2017, I don't think that we would have necessarily had any of these, because people have been seeing whatever this flying humanoid around Lake Michigan is for decades, and they weren't talking about it because they never even heard of anything similar. I mean, let's face it, people in this field, we know what Mothman is as far as we're familiar with the story, but most people have no idea. Like, they've never heard of John Keel. They don't know about the 1960s Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant. They've never heard of any of it. So most of these people who have been sitting on these sightings, they've all had this experience of thinking, maybe they were the only person to ever see something like this. And so when these sightings started being reported and people started seeing them get real coverage, because there's some mainstream media sort of bleed over in 2017 where these sightings got big enough where there were mainstream news outlets that were contacting people involved in this investigation, people I work with very closely, and we were talking to big news outlets about it, and that really helped get the word out to the point where finally people who had these crazy experiences, these seemingly impossible encounters, were finally seeing that they weren't alone, and it's led to something incredible as far as I'm concerned, because at this point, with the number of sightings that we've received, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that something strange is happening around Lake Michigan. And for people listening, I want them to know if they go on to singularfortean.com and they check out our timeline and stuff, I take this pretty seriously, and I try to do my due diligence as an investigator. So, if there's a sighting, and this happens, if there's a sighting that I think, might be a misidentification of a normal animal, I'm going to say that, and there definitely are. I have each of these sightings tagged according to sort of what I think is the likeliest explanation. I let people know who originally took this report, and then sort of who led the subsequent investigation on it. And so, I mean, we've got things tagged with stuff like, let me scroll down in my tags here. So, we've got it tagged with stuff like large birds or unexplained or potential hoax. Potential hoax, by the way, is by far the smallest category. I think there might be 2 in the entire timeline of dozens and dozens of sightings at this point. Large birds is probably about equal with the truly unexplained ones. And I think I talked about this a little the first time I was on the show, actually, sort of how